Kilgore, Texas Rangerettes were marching in a Texas contingent for an equal rights amendment for women. And even if the amendment to the Constitution was in serious political trouble, the women's movement could count some gains in economic terms and in the dialogue between sexes. Indeed, by the end of the decade, it was a movement so powerful that the women who led it in the beginning found that in living rooms, bedrooms, and workrooms, ordinary people were leading themselves. American women knew how far things had come and how far things still had to go.
How well does the White House keep its secrets?
Well, we've gotten quite a few secrets out of the White House. For example, the secret, sensitive National Security Council meetings, and also the top secret CIA cables that prove that President Nixon and his foreign policy czar Henry Kissinger were lying about the India-Pakistan crisis.
During the 70s, Washington leaked secrets like a sieve leaks water. Investigative reporters flourished.
Has the FBI been Anderson-proofed?
Well, we got evidence from inside the FBI that J. Edgar Hoover had been using FBI employees to write his books. Also, that he spent his summer vacations at the Del Mar racetrack as the guest of a Texas oil millionaire.
How easy is it to get secrets out of the Pentagon?
Well, I read the Secret Intelligence Digest, the intelligence reports on Vietnam. The security boys are investigating us here all the time.
A leak to the New York Times in 1971 connects to Watergate. The newspaper had printed excerpts from thousands of classified Pentagon papers detailing the hidden history of the Vietnam War. The government looked for a legal means to stop publication of the Pentagon papers, but was unsuccessful.
It's up to us to see through those covers and disguises.
The Nixon administration then did something illegal to the man who said he had stolen the papers. His name is Daniel Ellsberg, and the White House sent burglars into his psychiatrist's office hoping to find discrediting material about him. Nixon didn't like this man.
What Ellsberg really boils down to, the discrediting and all the rest, what it boils down to, I didn't want to discredit the man as an individual. I couldn't care less about the punk. I wanted to discredit that kind of activity, which was despicable and damaging to the national interest.
There was a link between Ellsberg, the Vietnam War, and Watergate. It all came together during the time of the J. Edgar Hoover funeral. Hoover had refused to do some of the domestic spying Nixon had asked for, and to get around the director of the FBI, the White House had formed its own Bureau of Investigation, an illegal organization called the Plumbers. It was the Plumbers who had broken into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. During these ceremonies, the group was in Washington with orders to guard Hoover's casket and to find Ellsberg and beat him up. There was a peace demonstration during the time of the Hoover ceremonies. Ellsberg was here, the target of a team led by Bernard Barker. Barker's second assignment was to test men for a later mission, a break-in at the Democratic Party's headquarters. Barker has declined to identify himself, but we think this is he, some weeks before the Watergate break-in.
I think it was about 10 or 12 people that I took up there. And in it were people that I would observe as later on were used in the Watergate.
The Watergate story moves to Moscow 3 weeks later. When he arrived in Russia, the president was in a grand swirl of war and peace. He needed secrecy to deal with the Russians. He needed publicity to be reelected. He had a blockade in place against Soviet ships trying to resupply Vietnam. Yet, for good reason, the Soviets received him warmly.
Mr. President, how's it going?
It's thought the reason Nixon was treated so well was that the Russians were on the edge of famine. Nixon opened a deal selling the Russians a quarter of America's grain crop for a strategic arms agreement. He also asked for Soviet pressure against North Vietnam in the peace talks. The American leader was the Soviets' enemy, but he was also their preferred candidate for the American presidency. They gave him a chance to speak to the Russian people. The American networks picked up this unusual setting, the President of the United States in the green room of the Kremlin Palace.
I deeply appreciate this opportunity your government.
On the same day this speech took place, Barker and his Cuban-American team were sent into the headquarters of the Democratic Party in Washington. The burglars, directed by the White House, made an undetected entry into the Watergate. They put taps on 2 phones. One tap didn't work. On the other, they intercepted sexual gossip. But infidelities were not the reason for the wiretaps. The Watergate burglars would have to go back again. Next time, they'd get caught.
In friendship, and in peace. И в мире. Спасибо и до свидания.
Now here comes the president's helicopter, Marine helicopter number 1, landing in the plaza on the east front of the Capitol. Amazing timing.
When Richard Nixon came back from Moscow, he was the most important man in the world of international affairs. His return was like Caesar coming to Rome, except that all his conquests had been peaceful. The agreement with Moscow made it appear that nuclear peace was at hand between the Soviets and the Western world. He had opened the door with Peking and trumped the Russians with the China card. Peace in Vietnam seemed just a hair's breadth away, and American boys were coming home from the wars.
At least. And Edward Cox, and now...
His family was a model of decorum. A writer who otherwise hated Nixon said, "A man who could produce daughters like that could not be all bad." The Capitol of the United States had been built with all those steps in the classical Roman style, so that one mounts into the building with a sense of greatness. Perhaps his style was imperial, but he was a leader. Perhaps his manner was secretive, but international agreements are never well arrived at openly.
The President of the United States.
Over 60% of the American people approved his handling of the presidency, and in the months to come, the figure would mount. If there were dissident Democrats, well, there are always dissident politicians. Nixon had risen so far above party that he had already arranged for his forthcoming election campaign to be handled by a group outside the Republican Party. Nixon had come to Congress to report on his triumph in Moscow. The Greeks said, "A man's character is his destiny." Somehow America's destiny would be changed because of this man's character. You've just seen Richard Nixon at one of the high points of his career. And of course, you know what's going to happen to him. Tomorrow night, we'll continue our discussion of the American dream and the American nightmare, our search into our country's recent past. We thought we'd give you something to keep you curious about tomorrow night's broadcast. And here are 2 scenes to think about. The first is nightmarish, the second is a dream to remember. On June 23, 1972, Richard Nixon committed the deed that cost him his presidency. News cameras were not present on June 23rd, but for the forthcoming convention, Nixon's people were having a film made of the president's activities on that day. There were 10 concealed microphones the production team didn't know about. 5 microphones are in the desk, 3 microphones are in the telephone extensions. There are 2 more in the lamps on the back wall you can't see. They all lead to a hidden tape recording system. So everything that was spoken in this office on June 23rd was being recorded, not just the nice things.
George, on that thing we were discussing this morning.
Richard Nixon had had himself bugged. That's part of the American nightmare.
Well, here the Americans only care about Europe and don't care about us.
Here's part of the American dream. July 4th, 1976, a day that almost redeemed the decade. There's a link between Watergate and the Declaration of Independence. That's what we'll discuss tomorrow. I'm Harry Reasoner. Good night.